Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our channel on the great saints. And today we're having another look at a story of Padre Pio, about the life and times of Padre Pio, and today specifically about a spiritual child of Padre Pio. And her name is Katarina Tangari, and she was selected by Padre Pio for a special, a daring mission. Selected by Padre Pio, but obviously God had really selected her through Padre Pio. And her mission in life was to operate behind the Iron Curtain, helping priests who were behind the Iron Curtain. And here is a picture of her. Her name is Madame Katarina Tangari. Now prior to this, Katarina, she was a very religious person, the best of the best, we could say, in so many ways, but life had dealt her some really tough blows. Then she met Padre Pio. Let's just run over her background. She was born in Austria. She was fluent in 7 languages. She had studied medicine, and she spent her life preparing scientific studies. But 3 months after she got married, they now moved to Italy, and there she was denounced as a spy, and she was arrested, and she was given a life sentence. She was sentenced to death, shall we say. She's only just married. Well, fortunately, she's very gifted, and she was able to spend the next 9 hours arguing her case. And so her sentence was changed from death to a prisoner for the duration of the war. And she spent many years after that just being transferred from prison to prison to prison during the war effort. Well, she was released finally. The war came to an end, fortunately. Her and her husband moved back to Vienna in Austria. But it was not too long after this before Katarina Tangari's husband just deserted her. This marriage wasn't for him, and he moved back to Italy, to Naples. And Katarina decided, well, her place is by her husband, and she followed him back. Things just didn't work out. They never really worked out between her and her husband. But there she heard about Padre Pio, and she decided she'd better go and meet Padre Pio, because if anyone can help her, it was Padre Pio. And she was accepted as Padre Pio's spiritual daughter. And so for the next 18 years, Padre Pio taught her 3 very important spiritual lessons. The first was on prayer, particularly the rosary, how to really pray the rosary devoutly. The second was how she could possess peace in her soul, no matter what the situation. And then the third thing Padre Pio taught her was the importance of thanking God no matter what came her way. So Padre Pio had identified now that she had this apostolate to deal with people, with priests behind the Iron Curtain, to be bringing them things, items, religious items in Czechoslovakia, Poland. She made many trips behind the Iron Curtain. Whatever, she carried suitcases with scapulars, rosaries, medals, all sorts of Catholic religious items. Padre Pio had called her to this, but she had experience with the Soviets before. She had run into the communists, and it had certainly been frightening to her. She had been visiting her family in Vienna one time, and thereafter she decided she was going to make a little pilgrimage to Maria Zell. That's a shrine, the protectress of Austria. Austria was still partly occupied by Soviet forces. And so going to the shrine, they had to pass through the Russian sector. The bus was pulled over at a checkpoint, and she was told to disembark with her luggage, as she was going to be interrogated. However, she remembered hearing that anyone who was taken off a bus in this sort of situation was simply never seen or heard of again. They just disappeared. And so as the officers were now dragging her away towards their little office there, she made a promise that she would make this pilgrimage to Maria Zell barefoot from this point on to Maria Zell for the rest of her life, if Our Lady would spare her. And then outside the office, she simply became immovable. No one can explain it, but you can imagine 2 officers could just lift her, one on each arm, and carry her into the office, but she was immovable. For the next 3 hours, no matter how hard they tried, they could not move her off the spot. And then there was the change of guard. And while this was happening, she's noticed someone a little way off beckoning into her, "Run, run, it is the time to run now." She ran to him, and they continued running through the bush. They ran for hours until they came to the shrine. And of course then in the shrine she went and thanked God for sparing her life. Well, she had nothing now. So what was she going to do? Well, she went to the hotel where they had been booked into, and as she walked through the door, the receptionist said to her, "Oh, Madame Tangari, your luggage has just been delivered." I don't know how it's possible that the luggage had been delivered, because remember, she was told to disembark with her luggage and the bus had left without her. But her luggage was here. Sounds like another miracle to her. So she had had this experience with the Soviets. It had been terrifying. She had narrowly escaped, and here was Padre Pio telling her that now this was going to be her new apostolate operating behind the Iron Curtain, and her objection was, "But people get arrested for that sort of thing." Padre Pio, just turned to her and said, "Well, that's what your mission is. That's what your apostolate is. Go and pray about it." And so over the next several years, she did make 100 journeys, crossing communist borders, and she would have with her at any one time 7 or 8 suitcases packed with religious items. How she was not arrested is actually another story. It's pretty interesting. Typically, when they'd arrive at a checkpoint, the guard would climb on the train. She would fall on her knees in her little compartment, her little cabin, and pray the rosary. The guard would come and inspect her cabin and see no one there, and he would just continue. So this happened for over 100 times. Obviously, different guards, different checkpoints, but she was never arrested. However, later on in her life, she was arrested because someone had published one of her books in Czechoslovakia, and they'd translated it and they'd left her name on the cover. So now she was a known figure in Czechoslovakia, and so the next time she was there, she was arrested, and she was sentenced to 15 months in prison. Why 15 months, she asked Our Lady. Couldn't it be 1 month or a few weeks? 15 months, because there are 15 decades of the rosary, Our Lady explained to her. It was an awful little prison. It was cramped, filled with people. They couldn't sleep in peace on the floor. If one person rolled, they all had to roll over. Horrible, smelly place. No private toilet or anything. And so she spent the next 15 months there in that prison. By the end of it, she was completely malnourished, and she also realized that she could no longer continue operating behind the Iron Curtain. And so she developed a new apostolate in the West, helping traditional priests who were often persecuted as well. And towards the end of her life, Madame Katarina Tangari seemed to receive this gift of being able to read people's souls. What was the future, what was God calling them to in their lives, whether it was a religious vocation or a marriage state. And so often parents would come up to her and say, "My daughter is engaged to be married. Could you please pray for her?" And she would pray for them, and after that she might turn to the parents and say, "Get rid of him. God will never bless this marriage. It will never work." Or on other occasions, she would agree and say, "Yes, God is going to bless this marriage, and it certainly will be all right." And here's one final little gem in the story, incredible gem. She'd gone to Padre Pio for confession, made her confession, and then afterwards Padre Pio turned to her and said, "You must thank God in everything, no matter what happens. Do you understand?" She agreed, "Yes, I understand." And Padre Pio again said, "No, you must thank God for everything, whatever happens. Do you understand?" He emphasized this again. Yes, of course I understand," she said. And then the third time, Padre Pio turned to her. So this was a bit like our Lord and St. Peter. 3 times he was told to look after his sheep. A third time, Padre Pio said to her, "You must thank God no matter what happens. Do you understand?" Yes, she understood. Well, 3 days later, she had just been to Mass, received communion. She was making her thanksgiving. People came running up to her and said, "Madame Tangari, your house is on fire." And so she went off to investigate what was happening. Sure enough, her house was burning down, and she was heard to say, Deo gratias. So no matter what had happened, she had lost everything here. She was thanking God. Anyway, the fire died down, and 3 things survived. The first was a statue of the Infant of Prague. Well, she had a great devotion to the Infant of Prague. So that was almost miraculous to survive. The second, there was this picture of Our Lady of the Immaculata. Also had a devotion to that image, and that survived. And the third was the manuscript of her writings. So she had spent years writing stories about Padre Pio, and this manuscript had survived, and eventually this manuscript became this little booklet on the life of Padre Pio. So it miraculously survived the fire. We do thank you for watching and for joining in this apostolate. Please do subscribe to our channel and like this video and send it to others as well.